Is culture key? So the previous introduction, already sort of set the stage for what I'm going to talk about, which is so far culture has been somehow neglected in terms of trying to think about explaining the variation of economic outcomes across country, simply because it's trying to explain why, for example, Italians work less than Germans. It would be sort of not satisfactory to just say Italians just like to work less. So what the people have been doing is usually explain variation in economic outcomes just looking at differences in policies. Maybe Italians have different institutions, or technology, or prices. But today we're going to talk about how we can actually think about culture in terms of how much we can explain of economic outcomes using culture. But to do that, first we have to define culture, what we mean by that, and how we can actually measure the effect of culture on economic outcomes. And then we're going to ask the most fundamental question, that is, if we're not satisfied with the previous answer, Italians simply differ from Germans, and we also want to ask why they do differ. So start asking questions about where these preferences come from and how they evolve. So first of all, what is culture? And already in his intro this morning, Joaquin was telling you about how we think about culture as a systematic variation in beliefs and preferences across groups and across time and space. And examples we just heard about is gender roles, for example, how Germans may feel about women in a different way than Italians, about their opportunity for women to work, for example, or what's the ideal family size is, as well as trust, and we talked about that, and saving and behavior. So here is an example of gender roles, of beliefs. And for example, we look across country at the share of people that agree with the statement, when jobs are scarce, men should have more right to a job than a woman. And there is a striking difference across countries in the answer to these questions. So, for example, in the United Kingdom, 12% of the population agree with the statement that women don't have the same right, while in Tunisia, for example, and India, the percentage of people that believe women don't have the same right to jobs is above 80%. Moreover, if we look at, for example, at the 0-1 kind of measure of whether women are allowed to the same job as men, here we have in red all the countries where there is a higher proportion of population that think women should not be allowed to the same job, and green are those in which instead is allowed. So there is a lot of variation across countries in what people believe is right and wrong, okay, and talking about the same issue. And this correlates very well with the participation of women in the labor market. So in this slide, I'm showing you the female labor force participation rate recently, in 2015, across the globe. And there are huge differences in how much women participate in the labor market across different countries around the world. Differences that sort of resemble those that we find for the gender roles. So in this color plot, I'm just showing you, on the y-axis, the share of women, of a population that agrees with women working against the labor force participation rate. And of course, there is a strong correlation. There is countries where there is a more, where people agree that women have a right to work, are also the countries where more women are working. So the question is this simply a correlation? Is that people believe women should be working and that's why women are working? Or is it because women are working that people believe that's the right thing to do? So the main challenge in this literature has always been what we call identification, that is trying to disentangle which is the direction of causality. And in a paper with my colleague Raquel Fernandez at NYU, we exploited what we call the epidemiological approach, which means take advantage of the portability of culture to separate the cultural explanation from that of markets and institutions. When we observe Italians working less, so we don't know whether it's because their markets are different, their institutions are different, or their culture is different. But when we look at migrants, Italian migrants in US, for example, well, when these people migrate, they're going to leave behind their markets and institutions, and only their culture will go with them. So that is the way we can actually separate, markets and institutions from culture. So what we do in that paper is to look at migrants in US and look at women that are second generation. So they are US citizens, they're born in US, they go to school in US, they work in US, they face the same opportunity, the same challenges, but they have a different cultural heritage, meaning they have parents that came from different countries around the world. So maybe through their family, they inherited a different kind of view of the world or belief about gender roles. So now these women will have the same wages, the same opportunity, the same labor markets, but they will differ only because their parents came from different countries where there was more or less labor force participation. So what we find is a large effect of having parents coming from different countries with different levels of labor force participation in the country of origin. So women that look the same, in every other respect, but one of them has parents coming from Italy and the other has parents coming from Sweden, they're going to have a different labor force participation rate simply because captured by the labor force participation rate of the country of origin. We also looked at whether their husband's culture may explain the working behavior of women. And we find that actually the husband's culture is even more important than the wife's culture when the two of them sit together and decide as a family whether she should be working or not on the market. So in another paper with Raquel and with Claudio Olivetti, we look at what we call men marrying their moms. That is, we look at men and we look at the working participation, the working behavior of their mothers, and we find a really large effect on the probability that their spouse works. So a mother who works increases the probability that a man's wife works by a large amount, from 39% to 71%. So the same man with making the same money, same age, education, everything else. The man that has a mother that did work has a probability that is 71% that his wife is working, and this percentage drops to 39% if his mom did not work. So there is clearly a strong, preference transmission that is going on through the family. However, beliefs, if they were just transmitted through the family, would not be changing. Think about it. Everybody's just transmitting the same belief over and over through generation. There would be no change. But beliefs do change over time. So here I'm showing you the percentage, so there is hope. The percentage of US that approves working wife. And we see, starting in 1930 up to 2000, there has been a huge change in the public approval of women working. So at the beginning of my sample, only 18% of the American population thought that women should be working. And at the end of my sample, around 2000, this percentage is now 80%. So large increase over time in the change. There's been a large change, especially in the 70s, a really radical change in the perception, in the public perception of women working. At the same time, large change in labor force participation of women. Women enter the labor force in great numbers and actually are one of the reasons why we saw a huge increase in GDP growth. So the large increase in GDP that we observe over time has been in many OECD countries driven by the entry of women in the labor force in large numbers. So the participation of women went from less than 20% to over 60%. Sort of resemble, right, the change in perception. So how do we explain the belief change over time? So on one hand, we have family that is sort of transmitting priors. So the first sort of view of the world that you form in the family is probably going to be in the family, whether your mom is work or whether, how it works in your family. But then you're going to experience the world at large. So you will be going to school, you will be working in an office, you will be going to church. And your vision of the world may change because you are exposed to different behaviors and and you observe different economic outcomes. So that's how you form what we call in jargon, your posteriors. So you update your belief as you experience the world. So in a paper with my co-author Laura Velkamp, we propose a learning theory of beliefs. So the idea is that, especially when there is uncertainty about outcomes, for example, we don't know the repercussions on family and children of women working, then people have to form belief. They don't know what is right and what is wrong. They sort of have to, form some beliefs about what they think it will be right. And when they form belief, they actually update as more information is revealed. So the way we think about beliefs and their evolution over time is in interaction with economic outcomes. So on one hand, beliefs are formed in the family, but then they are updated when you observe outcomes of women working. As women work, they create information for other women. They will update their belief, and then they will make themselves a choice of working or not working. And so the interaction between belief and labor force participation becomes mutual. There is a feedback. Beliefs imply, the decision of working. And as you work, you you generate information for new women that will update their belief. And so this kind of explanation is actually consistent with the S-shaped behavior of the time series over time. We see there are moments in which belief and labor force participation accelerate at the same time, like the 70s, moments of radical gender roles attitude change. And the reason is that there is this reinforcing mechanism. At the beginning, there is great uncertainty, few women work, but as more women work, more information is generated, making a lot of women update and entering the labor force in great numbers. As uncertainty is reduced and there is no much to learn anymore, you're gonna see, like the flattening out of the S-shaped curve. Not only can explain well the S-shaped behavior over time, but this kind of the explanation can explain also the geographic patterns of female labor force participation. And here I'm looking at county-level data for US. And what I see is that what I want you to see, there is a clustering. There is a geographic spreading around some areas where, there is more women working and more information generated and more other women around them will be working. So thinking about this made me think about how important it is for belief updating, the kind of experience you have and the kind of people that you meet. So that's why more recently, I've been working on networks and how the kind of network structuring can actually generate the different information you're exposed to. You may be exposed to information from people that are close to you or people that are far away from you. And this is going to be important for the speed of information, how fast information spreads. It really depends on whether you're going to look close by or far away, and also the novelty of information that you're exposed to. If you're looking only around you to people that are similar to you, you're probably going to be exposed to less novel information than if you can look, farther apart. And so we've been thinking about the relationship between network structure and how this information get diffused and, and how belief spread and growth. So think about a network where somebody has an idea or somebody has a new belief about whether women should be working or not. And on the left, we have a network where everybody is only linked to the two people next to him. And the other network, we have a different structure where the individuals are linked to the people next to them, which think about it's the family, but also to somebody that's far away. So what happens is that it takes, much less to spread the idea and to spread the new, belief in a network where there are long ties. And we see this also in the data when we look across countries and we plot on the y-axis a measure of innovations against a measure of length of the ties that is captured by this individualist index that is telling you how much people are form clusters and how much instead they are far apart and independent in their decision. So the longer the links, the more the network allows for experiencing something that is far and different, the more the innovation in the country. And that is strictly linked to growth, of course. But then the question is, if some linkages, some network structures seem to be better than others, so they actually are more, facilitates prosperity and enhance growth, why do we observe suboptimal networks in some countries than in the others? And so the idea of the paper is to look at what else can be spread through networks. And the other important thing that is affecting development and is spread through networks is germs. So we propose a theory in which the epidemic, this is the last slide, the epidemiological environment is important at the beginning of the century for the emergence of different network structures. So here I plot the measure of networks, how long are their links, against a measure of infection diseases, historical data, about 2 centuries ago, capturing the epidemiological environment. So whether some countries are more prone to get infectious diseases. So going back in history, you can see that some network structure maybe were optimal at that time to avoid the spread of infectious diseases. And so you actually find a more collectivist and short links in society where there was more exposed to infectious diseases. So conclusion, culture has a significant effect on economic outcomes, on innovation, on labor force participation, on growth. And what people believe is right or wrong, their trust in each other, the structure of their connection, have important effects on prosperity. And these relationships are complicated, they are mutual, they go in both directions, and also they affect institutions, are affected by institutions, but it's a very interesting and promising new areas of research. Thank you.